Hello and welcome to Realize Live 2023. My name is Matt Martin, and today I'll be covering license options files and how to use them to ensure license availability to your design teams. I'm going to drop my head off the screen and continue on. First, a bit about Sherpa. We're in Portland, Oregon, and since 2001, Sherpa has been providing engineering services to companies nationwide. We are a small but growing engineering company with many customers in the Pacific Northwest and nationwide. Our capabilities include complete turnkey engineering services with electrical and mechanical engineering coupled with industrial design. We have a precision machine shop for short-run production needs as well as prototyping. We do production-level 3D printing with carbon machines. We perform NX training in person, in-house, at your location, our location. We also offer self-paced training at nxtraining.com. We have 3 Team Center architects offering a wide range of Team Center services. And here's a graphic showing basically our capabilities. With introductions complete, I'll cover what a standard or common license file looks like. Then we'll get into options files, and I'll cover some common questions that I get, and some tips and tricks, closing remarks, and the like. So what is a FlexLM or FlexNet application? Is it any application that requires a distributable license? This kind of fits into digital rights management, that the rights to the software are owned by the company that developed the software, and then you have a license to run that. And this license is your portal into how to run that software. The license file will control the functionality that can be used. Functions are considered features. It'll control the software version. It'll limit the number of concurrent users. It can specify the systems on which the software can be used and the duration that the software can be used for. So if it's a 1-month license or a 1-year license, it'll be in the software. It'll be in the license file. Types of licensing available from Siemens. We have floating and concurrent licenses. So if you have 10 designers and 5 licenses, then you can have 5 concurrent designers using that license at any given time. And when one designer drops off the license, that is returned to the pool, and another designer can pick that up. A node lock license is a license that's tied to a specific machine. You can also have mixed licenses, which is a mixture of floating and concurrent licenses. With a request to Siemens or your software reseller, you can get a hardware dongle or key. So we're going to get into a license file. A basic license file is going to consist of the header, server and vendor lines, package or bundle lines, increment and feature lines, and then down at the bottom you're going to have a cross-reference section where it's going to break down your licenses and which features are attached to each of those different licenses. First, we'll get into the header. The header has great information as far as the contact name, your company name. It's got your sold to ID. It's got your WebKey access code. These are important for you or your users connecting to Siemens support. It'll have your company name contact information in here. It'll also have the version that this software that is allowed to be run with this license. And your customer account analyst, or the person who actually takes care of your license file and what's on it, the different versions that are on it. This one's got a little bit of extra information I don't see all the time. License quote, license ID. Your header will differ. Let's get a little bit deeper in here. The server line basically tells the license manager to expect information about the server. Okay, that server is going to be the actual server name or the machine name. This could also be an IP address. If you're running a local license, it could be the local host. Another keyword here is the composite. This is the composite host ID. This is generated from the getCID utility available from Siemens. And there's going to be a listening port. This is the port that it's also going to be used on the clients to build out the environment variable so that they can access the license server and connect to the licenses that are being served. If you do not have a server line, chances are this is a node lock license. If you have 3 server lines, then you probably know what you're doing with licensing, because this is a redundant server configuration or a triad. Next line down is the vendor line. The vendor line will call out the vendor daemon. So the vendor daemon, this is the Salt D vendor daemon. And then there's a path to the vendor daemon. So this is a new thing in the Siemens license server. Vendor daemon is located in a different directory than the license server utility, specifically the LMGRD utility. Then you have to have the absolute path to where that vendor daemon is. Okay, if they are there, then this could be actually eliminated, but it's already there. I just leave it there. And then there's another port here, and this is the return port for the vendor daemon port. This is another good one to have. And again, this is another any free port that's on your network can be identified for this. In NX, we use bundles to bundle together tools that are used for NX design. The way this works is that in the license file, options equals suite collects all of these components into a package, and that package is then distributed based on the package name and then an underscore with the feature name. The components are all the different tools that are part of that package. Increment line gets a little bit busy in that you have a feature name, and this feature name does not have a package prepending it. Okay, so this is a standalone NX tilt tool axis tool. Shows what the vendor daemon is, shows what the version of that vendor daemon is, and this one is really important. Your expiration date. This one is going to be, well, pretty much expired by the time realize is happening, but at the end of the month that one's going to expire, and how many licenses are available. Supersede basically means that it from the issue date forward, then all previous licenses are invalid. The dupe group UHD, this breaks down here. Basically what it's doing is when you have a user, a group, or rather a user, a display, or a host, it doesn't matter how many versions or instances of NX I start up, I'm only pulling a single license. And that's how this works, is this dupe group UHD. If this wasn't set for every time I start up an NX instance, if I'm doing regression testing and I have 3 versions of NX running, I would be pulling 3 licenses. So it's nice that this combines them into a single license, or into a single license checkout. A little bit more on the increment line. We start off with the issue date. So we can see that the date issued. There's some user info in here, and that user info for this particular one just says NX 5-axis mock add-on. So I can tell with that, because this is an add-on, it's not going to be a package, and I won't see the prepended package name at the beginning. It also has a number of borrow hours. We get into borrowing here in a little bit as well. And then the sign number. This is not an editable field, but the sign number basically is a hexadecimal number that authenticates the license file. So it's your decryption key, essentially. This is just a note about server configurations. In the upper left here, we've got the license request process. The client requests a license. The vendor daemon reads the license file and grants or denies the request. A single server configuration is by far the most common one I've run into, where you have a single server, a single license file, and that serves out to your client machines. Alternatively, you can have a node locked configuration, which really just needs a license file. The environment variable points directly to the license file. It's not 29,000 it's not port at host. To get to that, it is just a node lock license file. However, if you have a mixed license where your node lock license configurations are part of your normal license file, then this would be a normal port at host location for the value. So it would be the port 29,000 at the host, the license server name. And then it would read in the machine ID to make sure that it will validate against the license. The last one here is a redundant server configuration. This is a triad. As long as 2 of the 3 servers are up and communicating, a quorum is formed and it'll still serve licenses. This is a little bit more complicated as far as restarting license servers. That has to be started up in a specific order, with primary being first and then secondary license servers starting up after that. As long as you have 2 of the 3, you're still serving licenses. So it's a very robust way of serving licenses. Now we're on to license options files. Let's digress a little bit. Let's take a look at what a sample license file will look like. So again, we're up here at the header. I see that the sold to ID or install ID, I can see my web key access code, the contact name, the person in your company that's on file, the company name, and the contact inside that company with their email address. The date that this was created and the version. So this is version 2212. If this was said 2007, then I would not be able to run NX 2212. It'll also have information of your CAA contact information. You see here your server and vendor lines, your package line with the package name and the appended tools that are in that package. Here I have my increment line, same with the package name, the vendor daemon, and this one is permanent. So I could leave this license running on that server forever, and I would always have access to this version of software for NX. I can see here I've got 4, and again with the supersede Duke group and moving on there. At the bottom of this license file, I have the cross-reference that breaks it down with the package name, gives me the name of the file, name of this package, and then all the tools that are inside this package. At the very bottom, you have some stuff that's not included on a license file, but it's still part of your license. Okay. So now we're on to license options files. So understanding how your license is built helps you build license files. Or license options files, that is. There's a few different ways of building them. You can identify users by their username, IP address, project. There's a few different ways of identifying how to distribute these licenses, and we'll get into that here right now. But first, why do you want to deploy a license options file? One reason is to prevent people from just sitting on a license. Your license usage reports go out of whack when somebody just sits on a license overnight, so that next morning they come in and they have that license that they want. So by building a license options file, you can distribute the licenses needed to the different groups in your organization. Building a license options file, we start with keywords. I've got two keywords highlighted here, and it'll become apparent here on the next slide. But basically, there's a precedence rule for include and exclude, and I wanted to highlight those. And here are your precedence rules. So exclude anyone that's not on the everyone not on the list is allowed to use the feature. So that's kind of backwards, but if you're on the list, you can't use that feature. If you are on the include list, only those that are on the include list are allowed to use the feature. So if neither exists, then everybody's allowed to use all features. Once the include and exclude are invoked in the options file, then everyone else is implicitly outside of the group. So as soon as you use this include or exclude, you've got a lot more work to do on your options file. There's 2 approaches to this. You can either just list the exceptions, allow most users access, and accept out the ones that you don't. So if you have a really expensive license like Star CCM and you don't want your summer interns to access that expensive license, you create a group of your summer interns, you make them excluded, and those users would not be allowed to use those features, whatever features you call out. Or the opposite of that, you can set up include, and you have to then control access to all features by identifying the different users that you want to be in on those different license features. The options file is read from top down. There's an example here where if I use the max keyword, I use this max keyword and I have it set to all users, and then I want to have another max line for an individual user, I need to make sure that the max line for the individual user is first, so that user is identified before all users are then identified, because individual user is part of all users, and if all users is called out first, then individual user cannot be called out after that. You can use type to specify license restrictions. So the first one is the user. That's the low-hanging fruit. That's an easy one, but it makes your license options file kind of big. It's really much better to put together a group of users instead of just a single user. That's an easy way of kind of breaking down your organization to the different user groups that you have. And you can also use host, either the client host, IP address, and you can use IP addresses that have wildcards. So if you've got a specific group, maybe they're in a different location, they've got a different IP range that they're working with, you can exclude based on IP range using wildcards. You can also use display, which is the Windows system name, the IP address, or you can use project, specifically the environment variable LM project. Here I'm going to allocate licenses based on a group. So first I want to start off with, I want to make the group case insensitive and turn that on. Once that's turned on, I can declare my groups, and the groups are then, the group case is insensitive, so I don't have to worry about upper and lower case usernames as they come in. I can just let that go. And I built 3 groups here. I have a shop, I've got my 3DP group, and I've got my interns. If I wanted to exclude my interns from being able to access this license here, I write it up like this: exclude the NX93110 group for SDI interns. So these folks here cannot access this license. So the result is I tried to access a license that I was not a part of, and I was denied. I see that in the license log, and I can see that explicitly of what I tried to do. I tried to access the 93110 Polygon modeling, and I was denied because I was not a member of that group. Borrowing by default is set to 2,880 hours, which is 120 days, 17 weeks, or 4 months. You can completely eliminate borrowing by putting in a # on the increment borrowing line. I'll show you what that looks like. On the increment borrowing line right here, this basically enables borrowing for this license. So this is the license borrow option. So if you put a # right there, save this license file, and restart your license server, then borrowing is turned off throughout your organization. It's usually a bit much, in my opinion, but if you don't want borrowing anywhere, then you can turn off borrowing everywhere. I would prefer to control borrowing in my license options file. One example here that I'm working with is I don't want it to be 120 days. I want to bring this down to about 168 hours, which is 7 days. That seems more reasonable. So I put max borrow hours set to 168 and the users that I have in the group that are allowed to borrow will then be able to borrow for up to 7 days. I can see that that was successful in the log file. I can see that all these are set to 168 hours. So I get a question, why can't I just replace all the 2880s in my license file to 168? Well, I tried that, it doesn't work. So don't try that. It won't work. You can also effectively lock borrowing by creating a group or use the include for a single user, say like the license admin. And if I set it up to where the include borrow for a single user is set to somebody who will never borrow a license, then it's effectively locked. Borrow low water is a great keyword in that if I have 4 Mach 1, I want to make sure that if I do allow borrowing in my company, then I want to make sure that I have a couple left back home. So I set that to 2. And when I deploy the options file, I can see in the log file that that one is set to 2. Similarly, with the Mach 3 product design, I've got 3. And by inference here, I've got 1 reserved. I'm allowing 2 to be borrowed. That's how the borrow low water works. It's pretty nice. Let you keep licenses back for your design teams that aren't in need of borrowing or having to be remote. So, or not without access to the license server. TIMEOUTALL. This is a Flex-enabled application that has been inactive for a period longer than the specified time period. So by default, Siemens licenses will time out after 2 hours of inactivity and return to the pool. So an example of this is a workstation that's not plugged into a power backup. There's a power outage. That node all of a sudden lost power. That license was checked out. In 2 hours, that license will return itself. There are other tools to return licenses so that they don't stay out there for 2 hours. However, if you set the timeout to a lower number than the 7200 seconds, which is 2 hours, then it might not have an effect depending on how the vendor daemon controls inactivity. So results may vary. This is a tough one to test because it's hard to hang a license. But if you end up with hung licenses and they're not coming back to the pool very quickly, take a look at TIMEOUTALL. Reserve. So if you want to do reserve, then you can build either groups of users or call out individual users to reserve licenses for them. So on my example, I'm reserving 1 license of the 93110 for group SDI 3DP. I'm also reserving the machining licenses for the shop. So what this does is that if you're not in the group, you can't get the license. It's reserving it for that. The nice thing about using reserve too, instead of just sitting on the license, is it does not report that it is a checked out license. So the license usage report doesn't show that it's being used. It's just reserved. And an easier, possibly better way to do this is to use LM Project. So LM Project I'll get into here in a second, but reserve is a great way of holding a license back for a group or a specific user, more likely a group of users, so that group will always have access to a specific number of licenses. So if you had 4 groups doing industrial design, you could reserve, and you have 10 licenses, you could reserve 2 licenses for each group. That way they know they can always get to those. They at least have 2 licenses to keep working, whereas the remaining licenses are open to the pool and anyone can grab those. LM Project. This is a great way of controlling access to a specific license. My example here, this 93110 is a Mach 3 with Convergent, which is basically our 3DP prep tool that we're using to prepare models to get into our 3DP pipeline. By setting it as an environment variable, I can now allow the clients to opt in to this license. So by default, I will go through and I'll go to my 3DP folks and I'll put this LM project environment variable on their machines, on their client machines. They will have access to this license. If at some time in the future they need to increase their bandwidth, someone else wants to prep up a model for the 3DP pipeline, then I can add this environment variable to a new client, and then they are in this license. They can go get it. If you don't have that environment variable set, you can't get it. So it's really nice. It's very flexible in that way. So it makes it really easy to adjust who is in the project. So you could optionally set this in your launch path for, say, NX custom or in a batch file. You could set this variable and launch NX that way. Deploying an options file. So when the options file is ready, I've done all the manipulations to it, and I want to get it put out in the world. I'd like to do this in an isolated environment, make sure that I'm not messing up with production and I'm not interrupting what's currently happening in my organization. So I'll put the license file where it's supposed to be in the same location as the active licenses, with just the saltd or saltd.opt, and that's the file that will drop in there. When the license server is restarted, it will read the options file as well as the license file, and then know how to distribute those licenses. And I did find, when I first did this, I found that when I called out NX 12450 and NX 13440, that it's not a valid feature name. So right there I can see that the max borrow that I was setting up for those isn't going to work because I called it out wrong. They go edit the options file and bring in the mil found and the 5-axis Mach, and instead of the NX code for that, and it works fine. I can see how it shows up in the output log. And then in the OPT file, or the options file, I can see here that I left that line in just so I knew it was commented, and then NX 12450 actually is mil found. So I changed that line to mil found, and it worked just fine. Questions. One question I get a lot is, who's got my license? I need to get this license. Who's got it? If you're currently using options file, what's different with the new Siemens license server? Not a lot, just the placement of the saltd.opt file. And you may have tokens. You may have NX design tokens, SimCenter tokens, or what we have is star CCM tokens for a specific license. How many are there? Are they out? Who's got them? How come I can't get to this license? And I'll show you how to get to those. And what is the named user license? And when you deploy it, why can't anybody activate it? First one, who's got my license? So anyone who's running NX, if they navigate into their NX install directory, they're going to find a UG FlexLM directory. From there, you can run lmutil lmstat and query the license server. Okay, with the keys here of, I want to look at the license file. I need to point to the license server, and with a capital A, I'm looking at active or checked out licenses. A little bit easier to read. But in the end, this report that comes back in a command line really isn't that user-friendly. So what we've done is created a VBS script and a button to create a report. So who's got my license? So in NX, in my Team Center sessions, I've got a button that basically looks out and runs a VBS script. It creates an output file that is, which is basically is the raw report from util LM stat. It is parsed and formatted and dropped into an HTML format. And here I can see who's got what licenses. Okay. So I've got 2 licenses issued, 1 in use. I got 1 license issued, 1 in use. Okay, so mill found, I can see this user has that. This is a really nice report that the users can run from within NX. We also have some hooks out there for managers and whatnot to just run a command line tool, and it will also kick out this report. Checking for tokens. Many thanks to those folks up on the community site. Dennis DeBrouwer in particular for this one. The license that we have for Mach 3 with Convergent has a star CCM component. So you have to download and install star CCM, and you get these tokens that come along with it. But I wanted to make sure that I could either track them or understand who has the different tokens when they are in use. And this KB article that Dennis DeBrouwer created is posted up on the Siemens community site and is easy to find. But I've modified it a little bit to pick up these DOE tokens, and those are the star CCM tokens that I'm working with. While using the tool, I ran this script, and I can see that I've got 10 issued, total of 10 licenses in use, and I can see that I've got this particular feature pulled 9 licenses, and each license is a token. When is an options file not optional? When you have named user licenses, in your license file, you'll notice that there is a named user. Down at the very bottom, you'll see that the named user is called out, and if you deploy this license file without an options file, you're going to get a message that says, gives you the basics of what to do. Okay, it says that there needs to be an include, and it's missing, and it gives you the basics of what to do here. So you see right there, ugslmd.opt. If you use an include statement to include the username, it will take care of this problem. So my example down here is I created the options file, put the feature in there with the user keyword and the username, and it takes care of it. And that's pretty much it for license options files. They're not that difficult to set up. There are some rules to follow. I wanted to touch on a couple other Sherpas that are presenting at this year's Realize Live. The Talk and Teach NX CAD with Devin Croswell and NX Additive with Connor Shimamoto. He's doing a case study on composite cycling shoes. If you want to become a Siemens Community Catalyst, look at the upper right of the community page and you'll see a Catalyst button. If you want to follow me on the Siemens community, it's this little QR code right here. And again, I am Matt Martin from Sherpa Design, and I am a Community Catalyst. Check us out on nxtraining.com, and thank you very much. Enjoy Realize Live.